The first thing you hear is the sound, not voices, not machines, but hooves, thousands of them pounding against the cracked earth like the beating of a war drum, and then, through the shimmering heat of the Sahel, they appear. Not soldiers, not tanks, not trucks, but an army of donkeys. The camera pans across a sea of dust and sunlight, revealing a sight so strange, so unexpected, that you're not sure whether to laugh, cry, or just stare in disbelief. They're marching in formation, each one carrying something: barrels of water, sacks of seeds, bundles of young trees, all heading toward a river that did not exist. A year ago, and then you hear it. The voice of Captain Ibrahim. Calm, commanding, and impossible to ignore. They told me to beg for aid, he says, but I will not beg. They told me the desert will win, but the desert is no match for the will of a people who refuse to die. This is not a humanitarian mission, it's not charity, it's not another foreign-funded project that comes with chains and conditions. No, this is war. A war for survival, a war against the desert itself. For decades, the Sahel has been losing ground, entire villages swallowed by sand, rivers turned to dust, families forced to abandon land that had fed their ancestors for centuries. The statistics are terrifying every year. The Sahara creeps south, taking 60,000 hectares of Burkina Faso with it, and with it goes the future. But has launched a plan so wild, so audacious, so unthinkable, that even his closest advisors called it madness. He would raise an army not of soldiers, but of donkeys, millions of them, and he would turn them into the frontline fighters in the battle against desertification. How? By giving them the tools of life. Harnesses, carts, water containers, compost, and seedlings, and releasing them into a vast network of artificial rivers and green corridors carved through some of the driest land on Earth. These donkeys would carry water where no truck could go, transport young trees to where no human could survive for long, and rebuild the land. Step by step, hoof by hoof. And here's the part no one saw coming: it's working. In less than a year, the once silent desert is now alive with the sound of wind through young leaves, the buzzing of bees, the chatter of birds returning to places they had abandoned decades ago. But this is more than an environmental project. This is a political statement, a warning. A rallying cry. Has made it clear. Burkina Faso will not wait for the world to save it. It will save itself, and it will do so in a way the rest of the planet never saw coming. So tonight, we take you inside the operation that is stunning scientists, defying critics, and inspiring an entire continent. You'll see the hidden camps where the donkeys are bred and trained, the villages where the desert is being pushed back, and the truth about why this project is more dangerous and more revolutionary than it looks. Because in the end, this is not just a story about donkeys, it's a story about the will of a nation that refuses to die quietly. It's a story about Africa fighting back. And once you hear what we discovered, you'll never look at the desert or a donkey the same way again.
The dust was still in the air, the heat rippling off the cracked desert floor, when the sound hit. Thousands of hooves pounding the earth like war drums. From the horizon they came, a living river of donkeys, surging through the scorched land of Burkina Faso toward what had once been nothing but death and dust. But this was no stampede of chaos. This was a military operation in motion. This was Captain Ibrahim Traoré's most audacious environmental strike yet, and the world was about to find out why the survival of an entire nation was riding on the backs of these animals. At first, the villagers didn't believe what they were seeing. For years, the Sahel had been surrendering to the desert, the land drying and cracking, crops withering before they could even sprout. Rivers that once sustained generations had vanished into memory. Families had fled their ancestral homes, and for many, hope had become a luxury they could no longer afford. But today they watched as the donkeys flooded in, strong, sturdy, and relentless, carrying water, pulling saplings, transporting stones to rebuild soil barriers, hauling compost, and bringing with them the possibility of a future that had seemed impossible only months before. Captain Traoré had not called a press conference. There were no speeches at first, only action. The donkeys poured into the artificial river system, a sprawling network of canals carved through some of the driest zones of Burkina Faso, and they began working alongside men, women, and children. Every cart they pulled was loaded with life: water containers to irrigate, tree seedlings to plant, and supplies to restore grazing land. It was a scene so unexpected, so cinematic, that videos of it began exploding across social media before the first international journalist could even arrive. And yet, behind the dust and the noise was a deeper, more defiant truth. This was not just an environmental project. This was a declaration of independence. In Captain Traoré's own words, later broadcast from the capital, "We will not beg the world to save us. We will save ourselves. The desert will not win. Burkina Faso will not disappear. And we will do it in a way they never saw coming." The origins of this plan were as unconventional as its execution. For years, foreign aid agencies had arrived with flashy projects, expensive consultants, and high-tech machinery that broke down within months. Millions of dollars were poured into efforts that failed to consider the reality on the ground, the terrain, the people, the traditions. But Traoré, who had spent his life in these landscapes, knew something the outsiders did not. Sometimes the solution is not in the future, but in the past. Donkeys had been a quiet constant in rural life for centuries. Hardy, low maintenance, able to survive where even camels struggled, they were perfectly adapted to the Sahel's brutal conditions. But as urban migration increased and imported machinery became the symbol of modern progress, their role had diminished. Traoré saw an opportunity. If Burkina Faso could breed and train donkeys at a massive scale, they could replace expensive foreign machinery, restore mobility in rural areas, and, most importantly, tackle desertification head-on. And so the operation began, quietly at first, through rural cooperatives and military logistical support. Artificial rivers were dug to hold seasonal rainwater, creating green corridors through dying lands. The donkeys were then released into these zones, equipped with saddles, carts, and gear to aid in the planting of millions of trees and the transport of water and compost to the most arid areas. The speed of the transformation shocked even seasoned environmental scientists. In less than a year, areas once declared lost to the desert began to show signs of life. Grasses returned, the soil cooled, and microclimates began to form. Where there had been silence, there was now the sound of insects and birds. International agencies, initially skeptical, scrambled to study the model. And yet, Traoré was clear, this was not a blueprint to be sold or patented. "This knowledge belongs to Africa," he declared. "If it works for Burkina Faso, it can work for Niger, Mali, Chad, and beyond. We will share it freely, but not for profit, and never at the cost of our sovereignty." The news presenter's voice on that day carried both awe and defiance. Standing on the edge of one of these artificial rivers, the water shimmering under the unforgiving sun, I could see the scope of what was happening. Thousands of villagers working shoulder to shoulder, military trucks delivering seedlings, and everywhere, donkeys, moving tirelessly, their presence almost symbolic now. This was more than an environmental project. It was a movement, a living embodiment of resistance against the forces that had for decades dictated what African nations could or could not do. But the project's deeper meaning came into sharper focus when we traveled to the village of Kubri, where an elder named Yakuba told me something that stayed with me. When the desert came, we thought God had abandoned us. But now, we see it was men who abandoned us. The captain has shown us that we can bring life back with our own hands. And these donkeys, they are our soldiers. His voice cracked as he said it, and I understood then that this was not just about land. It was about dignity. The operation had not gone unnoticed by Burkina Faso's critics. Some called it a publicity stunt. Others accused Traoré of wasting resources that could be spent on urban development. But the momentum was unstoppable. Images of the green corridors began to circulate globally, and even skeptics had to acknowledge the results. And when foreign governments offered grants to help expand the project, Traoré made headlines again by refusing most of them. "We do not need charity wrapped in chains," he said. "We will accept partnership, but never dependency." By now, the story had taken on a life of its own. African social media exploded with memes of donkeys wearing military hats, children singing songs about the army of hooves, and artists painting murals of the animals marching through the desert like warriors. It became a symbol not just of environmental survival, but of Pan-African unity. Delegations from across the continent began arriving to see the model firsthand. And as I stood there reporting live for the evening broadcast, I realized that this was exactly why the story was going viral, because it wasn't about donkeys at all. It was about a people refusing to die quietly. In the final days of my coverage, I witnessed something extraordinary. A convoy of donkeys, led by farmers and soldiers, crossing the desert under a setting sun, each animal carrying either a water tank or a tree sapling. They moved in perfect rhythm, as if the desert itself was being forced to retreat step by step. Children ran alongside them, laughing, their feet kicking up the dust. And in that moment, I understood why Traore's plan had struck such a deep chord. It was simple, it was local, it worked, and it belonged entirely to the people who needed it most. When I returned to the capital for the final interview, Captain Traore looked me in the eye and said, "They will laugh at us until they see the results. Then they will try to take it from us. But we are ready. This land is ours. Its future is ours. And we will defend it with shovels, with water, and with donkeys, if that is what it takes." And with that, the broadcast closed. But the images remain. The desert is no longer silent. Burkina Faso is no longer waiting for salvation to come from outside. And somewhere, right now, a line of donkeys is moving across the horizon, carrying the future of a nation on their backs.
As reactions continue to pour in from across the continent, one thing is clear. Africa is demanding respect, sovereignty, and accountability. Was this just a diplomatic misstep or a deeper sign of shifting global alliances? We'll be watching closely. If you found this story important, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real, unfiltered African news. This is Talk of Africa 360, telling the stories that matter.